You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 14th of April, 2025, on Monocle Radio.
Is US President Donald Trump inspiring a new generation of South American authoritarians? Because that went tremendously last time. Related, does the US understand what is about to happen to its tourism industry? And have we come as a species to believe that bad news is good news? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the 3,000th edition of the Monocle Daily. Coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London, I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Julie Norman and Simon Brook will discuss the day's big stories. Plus we'll be in Helsinki meeting practitioners of the apparently dormant art of peacemaking. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the, that number again, 3,000th Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Julie Norman, Associate Professor in Politics and International Relations at University College London, and Simon Brook, Journalist and Communications Consultant. 3,000 episodes, Julie. Which one was your favourite?
Oh, definitely number 2022.
Really?
Yes.
We weren't all that happy with that one. We've talked about it a lot. It comes up, actually, 2022.
Well, I mean, it stands out in the mind. What can I say?
Okay, well, I'm glad. I'm glad that there's somebody making the case for episode 2022. To be clear, listeners, I have not got the least idea at this distance what went on in episode 2022. Simon, any favourites of yours in particular?
I'm going to stick my neck out and say episode 3000. This is going to be the best ever.
Well, no pressure then. Before we plough on to that and try and live up to the benchmark that Simon has set us, I know we've talked about this before, Julie, but I want to talk about it again just because I'm jealous. You are going hiking in Scotland.
Yes, I am leaving in a couple of days to do a trail run / hike up the West Highland Way. So I'll take the train up to Glasgow and then hike up to Fort William. So it's at 96 miles over 4 days. So wish me luck.
That does sound amazing, and I do look forward to hearing more about it. But Simon, can you compete with that? Are you undertaking any great epic quests or anything?
Nothing like that. I have to say, when you first told me about it, Julie, I missed the run bit. I thought you were just walking. I said, yeah, sounds quite nice. The running, yeah, I'm really impressed. Now, I will also be doing something that is quite close to nature, but that is less energetic, I think, and that is I'm really into gardening at the moment. So I've just managed to wash the soil off my hands to come into the studio here. But yeah, gardening is my thing of the moment.
I mean, it is the time of year for it. Are you attempting to encourage the growth of anything in particular?
Bee-loving plants. We live in gritty urban Acton, but we're trying to create a wildlife garden. The aim is to get those bees, not the East Asian hornets, which apparently are now...
No one likes them.
We don't like them. We want to keep them away. But bees and other bugs and things. Birds, whatever, any kind of nature-ish thing, we're all open for them.
Well, we will be starting in Washington, D.C., where US President Donald Trump has been hosting his Salvadorian counterpart, President Nayib Bukele, also recently known as proprietor of Trump's preferred Central American gulag, the prison known as Sikot in Tekaluka, to which the US has in recent weeks delivered hundreds of people with zero due process, including at least one who the US administration admits was sent there by mistake, but about which the US administration proposes to do, as of this broadcast, nothing. Elsewhere in the region, Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa has won re-election in a runoff over the weekend, in part due to a Bukele-esque crackdown on violent gangs. Here, first of all, is President Trump bringing President Bukele up to speed with the issue which really matters.
You know, they have weightlifting records, right? Yeah. A woman gets up and swings. She's incredible. A guy gets up and beats her by 100 pounds. What are you going to do? A record that hadn't been broken in 18 years. You know, they put on an ounce, quarter of an ounce, eighth of an ounce for 18 years. Now they have a guy come up, ping. The whole thing is crazy.
Julie, do you have any fixed views on women's weightlifting? I confess I find myself short.
I have no idea what they were talking about here. I will say
I'm not sure he did either.
Radio listeners cannot see me, but I was approached once in a gym to compete in a weightlifting competition, which I turned down. But I will say that I do go to the gym, I do work out, high respect for the women weightlifters. Not quite sure what Trump's dig was at, if he was liking it, if he was not liking it, but I just feel like let the women do their thing.
Well, yeah, Simon, I fear at that point we may have to reluctantly move on to arguably more pressing matters, which is the US government's ongoing process of removing people just because it doesn't like them and sending them to this ghastly dystopian supermax in El Salvador. One of the questions that was put to the two presidents today, Simon, was this one about the appalling case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who even the US government has admitted they shouldn't have sent there because really the poor fellow is entirely blameless. But both presidents are claiming that there's not a damn thing they can do about it. It's just tough luck he's stuck there.
Can I just address the women's weightlifter thing very briefly, Andrew? Sorry, before I do this. I thought that clip you played was fascinating because to me, it explained in some way why Donald Trump won the last election and why his poll ratings are still high despite the gyrations of the stock market and the bond market and other concerns about what he might be doing to destroy the American government. And that is, it sounds like two guys having a chat in a bar. Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's probably quite sexist. It is a bit bizarre. But if you want to know why people like Donald Trump, it is that sort of regular guy next door conversation. So I think that's what I would say about...
Do you not think maybe part of the reason that people like Donald Trump is that they're actually quite happy with the idea of people who don't look like them being rounded up and shipped off to a prison in a foreign country with no due process?
Very much so, absolutely. Yeah, this is it. And of course, there's high crime, concern about immigration are two issues that unite both the United States and a lot of these South American countries. People, I think the reason why we've seen this, swing to the right of these authoritarian governments in South America, and obviously, the swing to the right in the US as well, is because of fear. People are frightened of immigrants, they're frightened of crime, and politicians are feeding on this. And therefore, you've got, both with Trump and with Bukele and others, you've got politicians who really are on the same page here, and they feel that it does well for both of them, both in policy terms, but also to the appeal that they have to their core voters.
A lot of that is obviously true. President Bukele is extremely popular in El Salvador. There is absolutely no getting around that. And I think it's for fairly similar reasons that Daniel Noboa has been re-elected in Ecuador. But in terms of the United States, Julie, is it clear to you that the US public is quite as on board with this as President Trump might hope? Polls suggest that even a majority of Republicans are not terribly keen on the idea of people just being disappeared on the whim of some ICE agent who may or may not have the right person.
Yeah, you literally took the words out of my mouth, because I was looking at this poll data over the weekend, and even though there is this overall concern about, criminality and kind of this, exploiting this myth of like the violent immigrant. In fact, the polls show that people are not that supportive of this policy in particular. Like some of the other immigration policies, yes, but this idea of just rounding people up and deporting them to another country, this idea that, residents and possibly even citizens might be caught up with that for very obvious reasons, I think, is problematic to people on both sides of the aisle. Democrats being much more outspoken about it, but the polls do show, as Andrew just said, that this isn't something that I think voters will continue to give Trump a blank check on. But at the same time, it's something that not a lot of people are going to... A lot of politicians anyway won't stick their neck out on this, which I think is the problem.
Because there is a challenge here, I think, Simon, to, for example, such soppy due process-loving liberals as the presenter of this programme, that Bukele, whenever he is challenged on this, says that large numbers of towns in El Salvador used to be more or less unlivable. They were incredibly violent, dangerous, unpleasant places where people were scared to go out of their front doors, and now those towns are nice. People are happy, they're safe, they're able to do business, people aren't getting murdered by the score. The hard line worked. What is the comeback to that?
It's very difficult, isn't it? I think... you see the terrible things that are happening in those South American countries, and you think, well, thank goodness for the United States, the land of the free, bulwark of democracy. But then don't forget that polls in the States have shown over the last few years a growing number, quite a substantial number of people who would be willing to jettison democracy for what is described as a strong man, obviously a man, who would come along and solve a lot of the problems that they're facing. So I think we can look at what's happening in South America and say, well, that's one way of doing it. But I don't think we can feel confident and relaxed that we in the democratic West are completely removed from that. I think, as I say, if you look at polling, there are a growing number of people, and especially young people, which I find quite bizarre, who do think that it is worth sacrificing democracy and freedom for safety and law and order. And it's also interesting, this development, this philosophy on the right here, which regards states, individual states, as like a company. So the idea is you don't have democracy, but you do have good services. And if you don't like the services, you can't vote the government out, but you would move to another country. So it's almost like you'd swap consumer product. I don't like this brand of coffee anymore. I'm going to move to another kind of coffee. You could do the same in a government. So, I mean, again, I think it just shows really how for us liberals, dare I say it, assuming we are, democracy is obviously incredibly valuable. But for a growing number of people, it's like a transaction. It is good, but on the other hand, if I get safe streets, put food on the table, the inflation is tamed, then I'll give up democracy for what it's worth.
Just before we move off this one, Julie, and returning to the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, does it even make sense from Trump's own point of view that he's being so obstinate about this? Because you could see, even from his perspective, there would be a political logic to bringing him back. You get to look like you're magnanimous. You get to say, OK, we made a mistake, we're owning it. And that would become the story. And everybody forgets about the hundreds and hundreds of others who may or may not be there for good reasons.
One would think, and with any other president or politician, you would imagine them making that move. With Trump, I would just say, we just don't know his logic on things like this, and the things that would seem so obvious to any other person in that position just do not seem to fly with him. But this case is not going to go away. This case should not go away. Americans should stay on Trump. Policymakers, activists, everyone should stay on Trump about this and push this to a point where it is not a choice anymore for him to be able to just slough this off and think it's going to go away. This is something that Americans just, I think, cannot stand for.
Well, let's move along to the reason that we are all wearing Xi Jinping Asia Tour 2025 T-shirts and giant pointy foam hands. China's paramount leader has begun a 3-country yomp around the region in Vietnam, with Cambodia and Malaysia still to come. The trip has obviously been planned for some while before US President Donald Trump launched his current trade war against China. Usual caveat at this point, trade war ongoing as of this broadcast, cannot be held responsible for whatever Trump might have done or said between now and you listening to this on the podcast. It is therefore exquisite timing for Xi, who remarked upon arrival in Hanoi that there are no winners in trade wars and tariff wars. Simon, is it possible to get a sense of how bothered we think China actually is by any of this?
By the trade war? Well, I think they are very concerned, aren't they? I mean, I think they realise that everything is up in the air, everything is to play for with this capricious president, and the fact we're getting this situation that his trade advisors will be explaining the policy to Congress one minute while the president himself has just said, I'm suspending the tariffs. So it's interesting, isn't it? Again, coming back to this idea of, do you want democracy and accountability, or do you want order and stability? Perhaps you can't choose the two. China has long said, actually, we are about order and stability. And now, obviously, what we're seeing with Trump is that argument is even more convincing. And I think for a lot of for the countries that that Xi Jinping is going on this East Asian tour on, it's very much to emphasize that China is a partner of stability, that you can trust us, you know where we're coming from. Contrast that with the madness of the US. And it's quite an achievement, isn't it, when you think that you would have greater appeal. You would find more appealing a country without democracy that treats citizens so appallingly, that has this aggressive wolf diplomacy that sends gunboats out to terrify trawler fishermen, for instance, and somehow that is actually perhaps becoming more appealing to many countries than the US.
I mean, we are entitled, Julie, are we not, to a bit of a chuckle at China positioning itself as the upstanding guarantor of rules-based trade?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, Trump handed them this. I mean, this is the trade war, of course, creates, considerable concerns for China, but it's also a gift in a way where they can position themselves not only as the main economic partner, but as this kind of paragon of the way the world should work. And everyone who was maybe teetering or wasn't sure about them before, it's like now we're the obvious actor, and like we are the ones who are, as Simon said, we're the ones who are kind of standing for stability right now, and you can kind of count on us in a way that you can't count on the U.S. So I think China is very savvily leaning into that, and most countries in South Asia right now haven't wanted to choose between the U.S. and China, don't want to be caught in the middle of this. And there's both political and economic reasons that they don't want to get, sucked in with China too deeply, but they may feel they have no other choice right now.
Well, on that thought, Simon, and obviously we are broadcasting from Europe where there are many, many countries desperately hoping they're not going to have to pick a side between Europe and the United States. I'm sure it is the case, as Julie suggests, that Vietnam, Cambodia and Malaysia don't want to have to pick China or the United States. But if Vietnam, Cambodia and Malaysia have to pick one, they're likely to pick China, aren't they?
Yeah, for the reasons we've been outlining, it certainly does look more appealing. And of course, the problem is with this growing economic confidence, growing integration of the economies of these countries, it puts China in a good position to continue its military aggression, doesn't it? I mean, the South China Sea, the Spratly Islands and other places. There's also a question of Chinese soft power as well. Once you're trading with somebody, it's a kind of virtuous spiral, isn't it? That people like you more and therefore we might see for first time ever, China is a sort of, I don't think it's ever going to have products that match the appeal of Levi's and Apple, but, it's going to be much made in China is not going to be cheap necessarily. It's going to be our neighbour, our colleague, our friend sort of thing. So you can see where there is a tremendous appeal there, certainly to China, and the fact that Trump just seemed to be. He just has this idea, I think, doesn't he, that it's all about New York real estate, aggression, attack all the time, and you drive your trading partner into the ground, if you like. And obviously, I think that's not going down very well.
Just finally on this one, Julie, we can't let this one go without making you do that thing we make you do, where we say, Julie, explain to us, account for the behaviour of the United States, take some damn responsibility. But if we look at the tariffs, if we look at the tariffs that have been imposed on China, like just wild though they are, okay, fine, China is a potential rival or an actual rival in all sorts of realms to the United States. Okay, 46% on Vietnam, 49% on Cambodia. Are we any clearer yet as to what kind of sense that actually makes?
I mean, I can't say sense. I think where it came from is because those countries, especially Vietnam, kind of benefited after the last China-U.S. trade war in the sense that a lot of businesses, firms, manufacturing moved from China to Vietnam, to Cambodia, to other places, and they've kind of served as kind of a third country for a lot of what are actually Chinese exports coming into the U.S. And so you had a huge trade increase there. That trade imbalance that Trump is very fixated on increased, and so that's where some of that came from, I think. But again, it's a very illogical way then to slap tariffs on these countries that are essentially facilitating what the U.S. had wanted them to do. I think where the negotiations will end up focusing between the U.S. and these countries is, again, trying to identify what's actually Vietnamese, Cambodian, et cetera, exports to and from the U.S., as opposed to what are actually Chinese exports that are kind of disguised as Vietnam or Cambodian and that kind of thing.
Well, to the United States now, or as the case increasingly appears to be, not to the United States. The early verdict of international travellers on America's descent into isolationist autarky is in, and it would appear that the prospect of being arbitrarily incarcerated in an airport holding facility and or summarily deported is not much of an enticement. Travellers from Western Europe staying at least one night in the US are down 17% year on year, and stories of hostile border protocols keep on coming. Given that the US tourism business drives somewhere near $3 trillion of economic activity annually, this adds up to a tidy stack already. Summer could very much depend on how many people think shorter queues at Disneyland are worth the risk of being disappeared into a Salvadoran supermax. Simon, as I may have said from this chair before, and by golly will say again now, the United States is and has always been my absolute favourite place to visit. I have been dozens of times. I have leapt on any possible opportunity, however tenuous, to spend time there. I'm not actually sure right now how enthused I would be.
I completely understand. I'm due to go next month, and I am.
Well, it's been nice knowing you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm feeling that's assuming I get in, Andrew. That's the other thing, because we have heard these horror stories, haven't we, of people having their border security guards checking people's phones for anything that could be WhatsApp group or searches for things that could be critical of the Trump administration. So there is all this horror. I mean, as you know, if you're not a US citizen, getting into the US can be a little bit scary. There's always that lump in the throat you get, which you probably don't if you're just going to a European country, even post-Brexit. So I think this is quite a frightening thing. But it's also, it plays in, as I say, this idea that of soft power and Trump's lack of understanding of it. It's interesting that it just gives the impression of Fortress US. And if you add things like, the US aid being abolished, which was created by John F. Kennedy, of course, great hero. Voice of America ending. And you look at things like polls finding that China might be lagging on the US in most continents, but it's roughly tied in Africa. You can see how it's not just nerve-wracking, difficult for us who might want to travel to the US. It's the impression that gives of the US itself.
I mean, Julia, are you hearing anecdotally from within academia of unenthusiasm about the prospect? Because I have been really struck just in the last couple of months how many people I've just spoken to who may work in academia, media, business, whatever, who have said, yeah, that conference I usually go to, I'm going to give it a miss. That holiday I usually take, I think I'll try somewhere else. And I've heard several instances of people with, transatlantic family friendship groups who are all deciding to meet in Toronto or Montreal instead of New York or Chicago.
Oh, yeah, it's very much a real thing. I mean, I also have to go also this next month, but I am a citizen, so it's a little bit easier.
Again, it's been nice knowing you as well, Julie.
It means nothing anymore. But no, academics certainly, students certainly are very skittish about going to the U.S. right now. I think you'll see a lot more students studying abroad in Canada and other parts of Europe, et cetera, instead of, going to the U.S. on a student visa, which is a loss to everyone. This is just going to ripple out in so many different sectors. And there's the border fear, the fear of being monitored when you're inside. There's just the cost and people just not feeling that good about the U.S. right now and not wanting to go. And I think it's a huge disservice that I think Trump is being very short-sighted on to not see how some of what he's doing is going to affect these long-term trends.
I mean, you are right, Simon, that it's rarely an actually pleasant experience getting into the United States, although I can fondly recall a couple of exceptions to that. But yeah, when I went last summer, which was the most recent visit, which was before all of this, it was still the sort of 3-hour-long queue for passport control at Dulles Airport, and then just like miserable surly guards sort of like basically throwing my passport.
Don't be rude, they might be listening, Andrew. Stop it.
But basically throwing my passport back at me despite the fact that, visa all present and correct, etc. Is there any possible hope, and I know we've possibly been asking this or variations on this question for slightly more than a decade, that this might be the thing that causes Americans, especially those reliant on the hospitality and tourism sector, when they realise come summer that there's nobody here, do they start, noticing the connection between actions and consequences?
Yeah, exactly. It plays into that bigger picture, doesn't it? We might see this violent ructions on the stock exchange and on the bond market, but in small town America, have they noticed it? quite a bit of the reporting I've been seeing shows that it is beginning to permeate. A lot of Americans are still getting Trump supporters are still getting their news from Trump News. There you go. From from the news sources that support Trump, Fox News and things. But yeah, there are examples of people who, a quote in the FT last week from a woman who'd voted for Trump, then discovered that her Medicaid supply was going to be ended, and it was tragic because she said, I didn't know who was going to do this. Nobody mentioned this in the election.
What she meant was, I didn't know he was going to do this to me.
Or you weren't paying attention, I'm afraid, because he was. So there's a big question here, as you say, at what time do these changes really impinge on ordinary voters? But that's only half the equation. The second half of the equation is, to what extent can the Democrats then show that they are an alternative to the Trump administration? Because having worked in politics for many years, I can tell you it's dead easy to criticise the government and get people to criticise it with you. It's another thing to prove to people we could do a better job, therefore vote for us. And so far, I know we're only 6 months into this new administration, it looks like the Democrats are still all over the place, aren't they? So they really have to get their act together if we want them to capitalise on that anger, that lack of goodwill towards the government, given what ordinary people are seeing.
And just finally on this, Julie, I'm going to do one more of those things of making you account for the behaviour of the US government. But I've just been looking at stories that have been related by my own fellow countrymen, and I pick on Australia because I'm Australian, but because Australia is thought of as a friendly allied country to the United States. So what I'm doing here is not so much whinging about the way Australians are being treated, is pointing out that if they're doing this to Australians, imagine what it's going to be like for almost everybody else. But yeah, there have been, in recent days, reports in Australian media. One guy took a slightly circuitous, if that is the right word, I've never figured out how to pronounce that, route to New York because it was a slightly cheaper flight in premium economy. And they thought, you've taken an unusual route. They detained him and deported him and said, you can never come back. There was one Australian citizen living in New York City, living there with a job and a partner and all the house and all the rest of it, on a visa, which still had 18 months to run, went home to Australia for 3 days to attend his sister's memorial service, and was told he couldn't come back.
Yeah, it's just awful. And it's the kinds of things that are not even making headlines because there's just so much other stuff going on. And it's just ridiculous. And even when you said your treatment, Andrew, at the border, I was like, this is how they were in Australian? Because, we generally love Australians. And so we're, you think about people coming with, different kinds of backgrounds, religions, skin colors, etc.
I genuinely cannot even begin to imagine.
Right. And as Simon said too, just the fear that induces in people also. And it's just, again, so unnecessary. The U.S. does not need to be doing this. And again, is shooting itself in the foot. You want people coming to your country, and this idea of turning away not only tourists, but business people, students, anyone who the U.S. has always been a place that people want to go. It's just, it's as well as, of course, just the indecency of it all as well.
Well, to a thing now which some listeners may be doing even as they listen to this, the 3000th edition of the Monocle Daily. That thing is doomscrolling, a neologism coined during the pandemic to describe the habit of refreshing one's social media feeds while psychologically and or actually in the brace position in anticipation of further grim tidings. According to boffins, this may be genuinely bad for our health, both physical and mental. It costs us sleep, fuels anxiety, and may cause actual injury if we kick a table especially hard after reading a tweet by Jordan Peterson. Simon, are you a doomscroller?
I try really hard to not be.
That's a yes.
Exactly, yeah. I have to say I'm really into, sounds a really naff way of describing it, but I try and practice mindfulness. So quite often I find myself I want to get the news updates on my phone, and I'm thinking, no, Simon, you're not getting news updates. You're now doom scrolling. Put that phone away. And as I say, go and dig something in the garden or something. But I do know as a journalist that anything that induces not just fear, but anxiety is horribly gripping. It gets that amygdala, the fight or flight part of the brain going. So I have to admit, I'm guilty of creating doom scrolling stuff myself instead of looking for trouble. But as I say, I think the solution is just to try and be mindful about it and know when to run across Scotland, as you're doing, Julie, or something instead.
Julie, the boffins think that there is a certain evolutionary aspect to this, that people who are better attuned to threats have tended to survive longer. I mean, I guess the sort of primeval version of doom scrolling was just keeping a very close eye on the surrounding shrubbery. And the people who did that are the ones that we're descended from.
Yeah, but that's an actual danger to oneself. I just feel like this is different. And Simon and I were saying too, I don't really know that doom scrolling, I think of anything, people are doing the opposite these days. Like, to me, doom scrolling was kind of like a COVID thing. Like, the news is bad now, but because of that, I know a lot more people were just checking out and like not doing the constant scrolling the way they used to. And I think of my students now, like none of them are on Twitter. Like they don't they follow more like TikTok, Insta, but things that are more like seeing videos and animals and things like they're just like, they want stuff that's happy and entertaining. And so I feel like if anything, there's been a pivot almost towards that because people got sick of it and almost, maybe to some degree to a fault in terms of not keeping up with what's going on by some people's measures. But I think if anything, people realized how grim it was getting and tried to get out of it.
I mean, is it though, and this is my own potted theory, which may not stack up all that well to rigorous analysis, but you can kind of see that it's the means, Simon, by which people radicalise themselves, thinking most obviously of the proprietor of Twitter, now X, who has clearly just immersed himself in accounts run by, paranoid fantasists predicting the imminent collapse of Western civilization, and he has internalised it and he believes it.
Yeah, well, it's the echo chamber, isn't it? The idea that you just look at the things that suit you, and then obviously social media funnels those towards you when it looks at what you've been clicking through and scrolling down and things. And I think it shows, as I say, why Donald Trump's ratings are so buoyant, because so many of his fans are still looking at Fox News, which doesn't just cover critical stuff about the president. We've seen examples where it just makes things up to support him, whatever. Also interesting, I thought that some recent research from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism shows that news avoiders, this is heartbreaking again as a journalist, and you'll not want to hear it either, Andrew, sorry, but news avoidance is, at record levels. I mean, it's now 10% higher than it was 7 years ago, reaching about 39% of people across 20 key markets. So these are people who don't look at the news at all, which is really concerning. On the other hand, I'm really delighted, Julie, that you say that your students are looking at funny videos and pictures of cats and stuff like that. Perhaps that is the only way to deal with a Trump-dominated world.
Yeah.
Because just finally, Julie, what I also wonder, and this is a definite problem that our primeval ancestors did not have, is that you can now, in a way that we have never been able to do as human beings, absolutely immerse ourselves in the world's news at all times. 30 years ago, even if you were a massive news head, you could read 3 or 4 newspapers every day. You could watch the 6 o'clock news. You might tune in for a late bulletin. But the rest of the day, you're not thinking about that stuff. You've got other things to do. Whereas now, you can kind of see that it has broken the brains of people.
Oh, absolutely. I think about this. I mean, myself, from when I was a student to now, just how different it is to engage with current events and public affairs and that kind of stuff. It's like you have the choice now to immerse in it, whereas before it was like you'd have the news and then like sports would come on or whatever. And it was just like it was done. And I know for myself, there's often that tendency to feel that pressure to like be informed, and you think you're to some degree being a good citizen by doing that, but obviously there's limits to what the human brain can take with all of that. And I think a lot of the news ends up being not always that newsy. And it's, as Simon said, it's more just kind of what's going to get the clicks and what's going to kind of keep you on rather than what you actually need to know.
Julie Norman and Simon Brooke, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, in a world where power politics is making a comeback, arms spending is on the rise and multilateral institutions appear weaker, organisations working in the field of of peace building are struggling to adapt to this new reality. One of the leading actors in that field is CMI Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation, founded by and named after the late Martti Ahtisaari, who received the 2008 Nobel Peace Prize. Our Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsoff met up with CMI's current director Janne Taalas and began by asking him how the organisation that works across the continent and has played a key role in 16 peace processes is navigating these turbulent times.
The world is indeed in turmoil. Many of the existing practices and principles have been challenged. Multilateral organizations are weaker than they used to be. So much of the peacemaking action is outside multilateral organizations, unlike it was, let's say, 20 years ago. Corollary to that is that you have shrinking diplomatic space. There are countries that are not talking to each other, and that is a highly difficult situation. And that gives a space for peacemaking actors to support the multilateral actors, as well as trying to maintain certain links and discussions. We also see that there are emerging actors. There are actors who can actually talk to all the parties. Their currency is rising, that they are more and more important. There are new emerging actors that are shaping peace mediation outside the traditional peacemakers, and I think that is something that is very important development.
Who are these actors?
Let's say in, for example, Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, or Emirates, or Qatar, or China. Turkey has been quite long working on these areas. We know that Brazil, South Africa have also interested and looking at the possibilities to chip into the peacemaking. So these are the actors that are more and more well positioned to influence the peacemaking in the future.
The key to being a successful peace mediator lies in the ability to persuade warring parties to resolve their differences through political means rather than resorting to violence. However, we find ourselves in an increasingly belligerent world where military spending and aggressive rhetoric are on the rise. How can we advocate for peace as a viable solution in a world that views arms as the answer?
Excellent question. The biggest problem facing the peacemaking right now is the fact that military means are seen as a good, efficient way to resolve conflicts. Let's say for the last 15 years, we have seen the uptick of military conflict because politicians see that as a way to resolve the conflicts in kind of by force, not by negotiations as they were negotiated for the long time before, for the decades before that. That is due, we're not going to the details, but I see that due as a changes in geopolitics, as a changes in technology. But this is something that we need to address, and I think first step is for the kind of, especially in the Western world, the people to realize that is the problem. I felt for the long time that this was seen everywhere else, but not in Europe. But I think, and I hope that the war, what we have seen in Ukraine, will drive the message home that this is a global problem that we really need to look at and push our politicians to use non-military means to resolve conflicts.
Your organization was founded 25 years ago by the late Martti Ahtisaari, who passed away a bit more than a year ago, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, one of the most acclaimed and recognized peace mediators of the modern time. If Mr. Ahtisaari were alive today, what lessons could he teach us about peace mediation that would be relevant in today's world?
Yeah, after Martti's passing, we have been really reflecting quite a lot of his legacy, and I think it is very relevant today. It helps us to approach and entangle the conflicts today. I would say I would take up 3 of his main lessons in that are still relevant for every conflict that we can discuss from Ukraine to Gaza to Sudan to DRC. First of all, treat everybody equally. Talk to everybody. Be in touch with all the actors who are relevant and treat them in a way that is conducive to getting into kind of conclusion. The second thing, give priority to the parties of conflict. The conflict can only be resolved by the conflicting parties. help from outsiders, guarantees, support, kind of pressure from outside is needed, but the bottom line is that only the parties of the conflict can resolve the conflict. They have to find some contours of a common future together, and that is crucial. You cannot force a peace. And the third point, which I think is quite important, because what we are proud, Martti Ahtisaari, the peace processes, peace treaties, he was involved in Namibia, in Aceh, in Kosovo, in Northern Ireland, all have stood the test of time. And it is very difficult to create the peace that really is sustainable. And I think one key element of Martti's legacy is how to do it. And it is to support multilateral organizations, to find a way find a sustainable structure for the peace to thrive, and also bring in the civil society actors. I would say this would be the key lessons from Martti's legacy.
For Monocle in Helsinki, I'm Petri Burtsov.
Thank you, Petri. And that is all for edition 3000 of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Julie Norman and Simon Brook. The show was produced by Tom Webb and researched by Francesca Jukes. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.